You would not believe how quickly 15 years of loyalty can disappear in a single breath. Let me introduce myself first. I am Elena Marlowe. I am 38 years old, and until recently, I was the director of operations at a tech firm I helped build from scratch. I was born and raised just outside of Denver, Colorado, the daughter of a high school math teacher and a nurse. I never cared about titles or fame, only about building something meaningful with people I trusted. But let me tell you something I learned the hard way. Trust can be the very thing that gets you destroyed, especially when you give it to the wrong person. That morning, I showed up early to the office, more hopeful than I had been in years. I wore my favorite navy blazer, the one I kept pressed in the back of my closet for special moments, the kind that feel like milestones. I was under the impression I was walking into a meeting to discuss my promotion to Chief Operating Officer. I had been preparing for months, refining my strategy, compiling performance metrics, and outlining a long-term roadmap to grow our infrastructure. I knew I was the right person for the role. I had earned it. I had worked for it. And most importantly, I had built the very systems that made the company scalable in the first place. But the moment I stepped into that boardroom, something felt wrong. The air was heavy, cold. Trevor Daines, my co-founder and the company's CEO, sat at the head of the table with a manufactured calmness that almost made my skin crawl. I smiled politely, expecting at least some professional warmth, maybe even congratulations. Instead, he slid a single piece of paper across the polished wooden table and said, "Elena, we appreciate everything you've done, but you are no longer aligned with our culture. We're letting you go." I blinked once, then twice. I glanced at the paper in front of me, thinking maybe it was a joke or a mistake. But no, it was a formal termination letter, already signed. I looked up at him and saw no remorse, not even discomfort. Just a rehearsed line delivered like a bad scene in a cheap drama. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I did not beg. I simply sat there and stared at the man who had just severed me from something I helped give life to. And then I smiled. A small, quiet smile. Because Trevor had no idea what he had just done. He had not fired an employee. He had awakened something in me that would burn a lot brighter than resentment. What he did not know, what he had clearly forgotten or chosen to ignore, was that this company, Vireon Metrics, legally existed because of me. Literally. It started 15 years ago in my old apartment with 2 desks, 1 secondhand server, and a dream that we dared to chase. Trevor had the charisma, the funding contacts, the pitch. I had the operations, the logistics, and the endurance. And when he could not legally register a new business because of an unresolved lawsuit from his previous startup, guess who signed the founding paperwork as the sole owner? Me, Elena Marlowe. But Trevor always said we were partners, said he would fix the ownership later, said paperwork was just a formality. Over the years, I trusted him to make good on his word. I let him take the spotlight while I built the machine underneath. I ran the teams. I negotiated the contracts. I solved the problems when things broke. And still, I stayed in the background. Quiet, loyal, invisible. I did not need applause. I just wanted to build something lasting. But that boardroom moment, that betrayal, it made me realize something. Being invisible only works until someone tries to erase you entirely. And Trevor tried. Oh, he really tried. But the one thing you should never forget is this. When you think you have gotten rid of someone, you had better make sure they are not the very foundation holding everything up. Because when you remove the wrong pillar, the whole building might just come crashing down. So no, I did not cry when Trevor fired me. I did not storm out. I simply stood, picked up that sad little termination letter, folded it neatly, and thanked him for his time. Because what Trevor had just handed me was not rejection. It was permission. Permission to remind him and everyone else in that company exactly who I am and what I built. And when the truth finally came out, it would not just shake the room, it would shatter the walls. If you had told me 15 years ago that I would be ousted from a company I legally owned, I would have laughed. Not because I thought it was impossible, but because I never believed that someone I considered family would ever do something like that to me. You see, this whole story began in the spring of 2010. I was 23, newly laid off and living in a tiny apartment just outside of Denver with more ambition than money. Trevor Danes, who was then 30, had just crashed out of his second failed startup and was nursing both a bruised ego and a pending legal case related to breach of contract. We were both broke, restless, and desperate to create something that mattered. That was when the idea for Vireon Metrics was born. On my living room floor, surrounded by pizza boxes, whiteboards, and too much caffeine. Trevor had always been the visionary. He could sell ice to an Eskimo, charm his way into any investor room, and talk about data analytics like it was poetry. I was the builder. I loved figuring out how things worked, setting up systems, organizing chaos into something repeatable. We made a good team, or so I thought. When it came time to officially register the company, Trevor sat me down and said there was a slight complication. Because of ongoing legal restrictions from his last company, he could not be listed as an owner or director on any new corporate entity until the case was resolved. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "Elena, I need you to put the business under your name, just for a few months. Once everything clears, we will fix it, I promise." I did not even hesitate. Of course, I agreed. He was my friend, my business partner, and I trusted him. So we filed everything under my name. Elena Marlowe, sole proprietor and founding owner of Vireon Metrics. The bank account, the legal structure, the contracts, the intellectual property filings. Every signature was mine. At the time, it did not feel like a big deal. It felt like a formality, a placeholder until Trevor's name could be added officially. I was proud of what we were building together, and the legal details felt small compared to the vision we had for the company. Things moved quickly after that. Within the first 6 months, we landed 2 major clients through Trevor's connections. I built the back-end systems from scratch using low-code platforms and duct-taped API integrations. I handled payroll, onboarding, internal documentation, and client reporting. We worked 14-hour days, slept on office couches, and argued over everything from logo fonts to pricing models. But no matter how hard things got, I believed we were in it together. I believed that once the company grew, everything would fall into place, including the paperwork. But the company did not just grow, it exploded. In our 3rd year, we hit our first $1 million in revenue, then 5, then 15. And every time I asked Trevor about the ownership documents, he would wave me off with a smile and say, "We will get to it, Elena, once we close the Series A, once we expand the team, once the legal stuff is done." And every time, I believed him. I told myself that it was not urgent, that the trust we had built was stronger than any piece of paper. But as the years passed and the funding rounds came and went, something strange started to happen. The promise to fix the ownership? It just stopped coming up. Looking back now, I wonder if that was his plan all along. If maybe, from the very beginning, Trevor saw me as a temporary tool to help him rebuild his career. Maybe he thought I would never question the balance of power if I was busy keeping the company running. And for a long time, he was right. I stayed in the shadows, content with being the backbone while he stood in the spotlight. I trusted him to honor his word. I trusted him to treat me as an equal. And the truth is, I ignored the signs because I did not want to believe that someone I considered a brother could use me like that. But the documents never changed. The ownership never shifted. And somewhere along the way, the lines between partner and pawn became very clear, at least to him. To me, it was always a shared dream. To him, it became a game of leverage. He just forgot one crucial detail: the name on every legal form, every original filing, every core contract from day one. It was mine. And that detail, that forgotten little line on the bottom of the paperwork, it would soon become the one thing he could not control. There is a kind of pride that comes from building something with your own 2 hands. Not just having your name on a door, but knowing every bolt, wire, and heartbeat of what makes that thing function. That was what Vireon Metrics was to me. I was not just part of it. I was its engine. I built it piece by piece, hour by hour. While Trevor stood on stages in tailored suits talking about our shared vision, I was working late nights configuring client portals, rewriting broken code, and leading operations meetings where the real work happened. He gave the speeches. I got my hands dirty. In the early years, when it was just the 2 of us and a handful of contract developers, I did everything that did not involve pitching investors. I hired our first data analysts, onboarded our first clients, set up the accounting systems, and trained the support team. I wrote every internal document from scratch. I even taught myself enough front-end design to make sure our dashboards were functional and intuitive. Trevor called me indispensable in private. But in public, I was the quiet one in the back of the room, rarely introduced by name, sometimes not introduced at all. At first, I did not mind. I told myself we were playing to our strengths. Trevor was good with people. He knew how to sell. He knew how to speak in a way that made venture capitalists lean forward. I never craved the spotlight. I liked making things work. But slowly, something began to change. As our team grew, as we brought on more clients and hired more executives, Trevor's version of our story began to shift. It was subtle at first. At one investor dinner, he introduced me as our back office lead. At a partner meeting, I overheard him call me operations support. I laughed it off then. But it happened again. And again. There was one moment that still stings. We were at a major industry summit, and Vireon was being featured as one of the fastest-growing analytics firms in the country. Trevor was invited to give a keynote. I had helped him craft the entire presentation, gathered the metrics, built the graphics, designed the flow. As he stepped on stage, he turned to me and said, "Wish me luck," like I was his assistant. Then he gave a 30-minute speech in which he used the phrase, "I built this company from nothing," 3 different times. I sat in the third row and felt like I had been erased in front of hundreds of people. But the truth is, I let it happen. I let him take credit because I thought it did not matter. I thought that as long as the company thrived and the team respected me, I could live without the applause. I believed we were in this together. I believed that my work would always speak louder than any title Trevor gave me. But titles are powerful. And the more he kept me behind the curtain, the more the company began to reflect his version of events. Not the truth. I started to notice it in small ways. New hires came to me asking questions that should have gone to their department heads. Partners emailed Trevor for every decision, even ones that had always been mine. When I corrected the narrative in meetings, people seemed surprised. "Oh, I did not realize you handled that," they would say. Of course they did not. Trevor never told them. He made me small because it served him. He made me invisible because it made him look bigger. That realization hit me harder than I expected. I was not just being overlooked. I was being strategically erased. And for what? So he could play the solo genius? So he could pretend he had done it all without help? I had given everything to this company. My time, my health, my energy, even my name on every legal document. And now, the man I once called a partner was slowly writing me out of the story we had written together. But here is the thing about being invisible. People stop watching you. They stop thinking you are a threat. They underestimate you. And that is exactly what Trevor did. He thought, because I was quiet, I was passive, because I stayed in the background, I would stay silent forever. But he forgot who built the foundation. And he definitely forgot who still owned it. He was the face of Vireon Metrics, sure, but I was its hands, its spine, its voice, quiet for now, but not for long. It started slowly, like a tiny crack in a window you barely notice until the whole thing shatters. About 6 months before Trevor fired me, things just started to feel wrong. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet shift I could not quite name at first. One morning, I tried to log into our internal roadmap system, the same one I had been using for years. My password did not work. I figured it was just a glitch. I submitted a ticket. The IT manager responded politely and said my access had been temporarily paused for review. That was strange, but I let it go. A week later, my permissions on the financial dashboards disappeared too. No explanation, just gone. I walked down to the finance team and asked if there had been a system update. They looked confused, checked my account, then told me that access was now restricted to leadership only. I reminded them that I was the director of operations and had signed off on most of those dashboards myself. They looked uncomfortable, apologized, and told me they were just following new protocols. That was the moment something clicked in my chest. Something was shifting beneath me. And I was not being told why. I was not just being left out of decisions. I was being quietly moved out of the way. Projects I had led from the beginning were being reassigned. A client feedback initiative I had launched was suddenly moved to someone else's plate. No one informed me. No one asked me. When I brought it up to one of the department heads, she just shrugged and said, "I thought Trevor wanted Naomi to take it from here." Naomi, that name again. I had heard it more and more in passing, always attached to something that used to be mine. I had trained Naomi Trent myself when she joined the company 2 years earlier. She was smart, driven, and eager to learn. I liked her, but now her name was showing up in meetings I was not invited to. I asked Trevor about it once, after a staff meeting. I waited until the room cleared and casually said, "Hey, just curious. What is Naomi's new role exactly? Seems like she is stepping into a lot of ops projects." He smiled like it was nothing and said, "Oh, she is just helping out where needed. Do not worry, you are still running the show." But I was not. Not anymore. People had started bypassing me, reporting directly to Trevor or Naomi. I was being slowly pushed out of my own seat, and I knew it. Then came the worst moment of all. I was catching up with one of our marketing leads, just chatting casually about timelines. At one point, she said, "Well, Naomi definitely has a clearer vision for the COO role. I am sure she will nail it." I froze. "The COO role?" I asked. She nodded. "Yeah, Trevor mentioned it last week. I thought you knew." I smiled and changed the subject, but inside, I felt my stomach sink. I had not known. No one had told me that the position I had been quietly working toward, the one I had drafted plans for, was already being filled behind my back. I started piecing things together after that. The board meetings I was left out of, the strategy calls that now happened without me, the executive reports that no longer showed up in my inbox. It was all there, quiet, polite, and deliberate. And every time I asked for clarity, I got vague answers, shifting explanations, or cheerful dismissal. Trevor never raised his voice. He never accused me of anything. He just smiled and nodded while quietly dismantling my authority, one piece at a time. I knew what it was. It was the kind of maneuver you only make when you want someone gone, but do not want the mess of firing them outright. He wanted me to quit. He wanted me to feel invisible, small, irrelevant. He was hoping I would get tired of fighting for space in a company I had already built and just walk away. But I did not, because I knew something he seemed to have forgotten. He could take my access. He could reassign my projects. He could even strip me of my title. But what he could not do, what he would never be able to erase, was the fact that I still legally owned the entire company. Every day he ignored, that was a day he walked deeper into a mistake that would eventually cost him everything. And he had no idea it was coming. There are few things more painful than watching someone take credit for work that came from your own hands, your own mind, and your own sleepless nights. That pain is different when it is not just an idea or a document. It is your vision, your voice, a part of you. And for me, that pain hit hard the day I sat in the back row of our executive conference room, watching Naomi Trent unveil a plan I had poured weeks of my life into, with not even a passing mention of my name. I had started drafting my proposal for the Chief Operating Officer role nearly 2 months earlier, long before I realized that Trevor had already made his decision. I did not rush it. I treated it like a roadmap for the next 5 years of our company. I ran performance metrics across every department, mapped out restructuring plans, proposed a new employee development system, and even designed rollout phases to keep operations lean while scaling. I stayed late every night, often leaving the office after midnight, thinking this was my chance to step into a bigger leadership role, one I had already been doing without the title. The core of my proposal was a theme I believed deeply in: data moves culture. It was more than a slogan. It was a guiding principle for how I thought we should evolve as a company, using real-time analytics to shape internal workflows, improve morale, and eliminate bottlenecks. I created that phrase after a heated discussion with the department lead, who insisted culture was just soft stuff. I proved him wrong with charts, reports, and retention numbers. That tagline became the backbone of the whole strategy, and I was proud of it. When the announcement went out that Naomi had officially been named Chief Operating Officer, I was shocked. I had never been told the role was finalized. I had never been interviewed. No one even acknowledged that I had submitted a proposal. I felt blindsided, but I swallowed the hurt and told myself I would at least be professional. I would attend her welcome presentation, offer support, and hope that maybe some of my ideas still made it into the plan for the betterment of the company. But nothing prepared me for what I actually saw. The moment the first slide clicked onto the screen, my jaw clenched. The structure was identical to mine, not similar. Identical. Same title headers, same layout, same flow from current state analysis to phased rollout. Even the budget breakdown I had revised 3 times to make it sustainable. It was there, line for line. Naomi stood confidently at the podium, walking the audience through what she called her vision for Vireon. People nodded along, impressed, taking notes, asking questions. And there, at the top of slide number 4, bold and proud, was my tagline: Data moves culture. No one looked at me. No one seemed to realize what had happened. Or worse, maybe they did, and just chose to stay silent. I sat there for 20 painful minutes, listening to a stranger present my work like it was hers. There was not a single reference to collaboration, no mention of a team effort. My name was gone, completely erased from the thing I had built with care and passion. It was as if I had never existed. After the presentation, people gathered around Naomi, congratulating her, shaking her hand, complimenting her vision. I stood in the back, invisible again. I wanted to scream, but I did not. I kept my face calm, my back straight, because in that moment, I realized something that changed everything. They did not just take my work, they underestimated me again. Trevor thought he had removed me. Naomi thought I would stay silent. But what neither of them realized was that I had never been someone they could erase that easily. That presentation was more than theft. It was proof that without me, they had nothing new to offer. No original vision, no fresh ideas. They needed me to build. They needed me to dream. But they did not want to give me credit. And that was fine, because I still had something much more powerful than a title or a deck of slides. I had the truth. I had the paper trail. And most importantly, I had the legal ownership of the very company they were standing in. They thought they had stolen my future. But all they had done was walk a little further into a trap I did not even need to set. They built it themselves, brick by brick, and I was ready to show them exactly what they had done. The minute I stepped out of the building with that pathetic termination letter in my bag, I called Janice Holloway. She had been my lawyer and my trusted advisor for almost 2 decades. Janice was the one who helped Trevor and me draft our first company documents back when Vireon Metrics was nothing more than a dream and 2 overworked laptops in my apartment. I did not even need to explain the situation in detail. The second she picked up the phone and heard the tension in my voice, she said, "Come to my office right now." When I arrived, Janice already had a thick manila folder waiting for me. She did not ask how I was. She did not offer condolences. She simply opened the folder, pulled out our original LLC filings, and said, "Let us see what they forgot." She flipped through the pages carefully, tapping her pen on the table as she examined every line. Then she looked up, a half smile forming on her face. "Elena," she said slowly, "you are still the sole legal owner of Vireon Metrics. No amendments, no changes, not even a partial transfer. Legally, you still control everything." I sat in silence, letting her words land. I had expected some version of this outcome. I remembered signing the founding paperwork in my name all those years ago, but I always assumed that somewhere along the line, Trevor had formalized the changes he promised. Apparently, he never bothered. Or maybe he never intended to. Either way, he had made a critical mistake. He had spent the last 15 years pretending to be the legal face of a company that, on paper, still belonged entirely to me. Janice leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and added, "We have a bigger problem now. Or rather, Trevor does. I started reviewing your corporate records, and there are at least 20 contracts from the past 3 years, some worth millions, that required co-signature by the registered owner. That means you. And guess what? Your name is on none of them." I felt my heart pound in my chest. "What does that mean?" I asked. Janice raised an eyebrow and said, "It means those contracts are not legally binding. At best, they are in a gray area. At worst, they are completely void. Clients could walk away, vendors could sue, investors could pull funding, and Trevor, he could be in serious legal trouble for misrepresentation and unauthorized signatory conduct. It was surreal hearing those words. For so long, I had felt like my power had been stripped away, like I was some forgotten piece of the company I helped build. But now, I realized the truth. I had never lost power. I had just forgotten I had it. Trevor might have erased my name from the website, the board meetings, and the strategy sessions, but he could not erase it from the law. And now, all the moves he made behind my back were about to come back to haunt him. Janice pulled out a few recent contract summaries from a folder she had compiled. There was a client acquisition deal worth $2 million, a 3-year licensing agreement with a European firm, a service expansion project with a third-party provider based in Austin. None of them had my signature. All of them were signed under Trevor's name, using titles and authority he never legally had. The liability was massive. Janice looked me in the eye and said, "This is no longer just about your job, Elena. This is about ownership, fraud, and corporate governance. You have every legal right to reclaim your place and hold Trevor accountable." I sat there for a moment, absorbing everything. I felt the rage settle into something colder, calmer. I was not going to retaliate with chaos. I was going to respond with facts, paperwork, and consequences. I did not need revenge. I needed the truth on record. Trevor had built an empire on illusion, and he thought I would never dare challenge it. But now, I had all the proof I needed to bring it crashing down, and not a single false word was required. I stood up, looked at Janice, and said, "Set up a meeting. I want to do this by the book." She smiled, nodded, and replied, "I already knew you would say that. Let us bring them the truth, and let them deal with what they ignored for 15 years. 2 days after I was fired, I walked back into Vireon Metrics, not as a disgraced ex-employee, but as its rightful legal owner. I was not alone. Janice walked beside me, sharp and composed in a gray blazer, holding a briefcase filled with originals and certified copies. Behind her was a compliance officer we had retained just hours earlier. I had chosen someone neutral, experienced, and impossible to intimidate. We did not announce ourselves at reception. We did not make small talk. We simply walked straight through the glass doors and headed for the executive boardroom. It was the same room where I had been dismissed. Same frosted glass walls, same long mahogany table, same faint scent of citrus cleaning spray that someone had used to wipe down any trace of what happened that day. But this time, I was not sitting quietly, blinking away shock. I was here to speak, to document, to take control. The board had been summoned already, Trevor included. When he saw me walk in with Janice and the compliance officer, his expression dropped like a stone in a well. "Good morning," I said calmly. I laid my folder on the table and slid it forward. Inside was everything. My original ownership paperwork, unamended records from the state registry, documentation of the invalid contracts, and a memo from Janice outlining the legal risk exposure. No theatrics, no drama, just pages and pages of facts. Janice opened the meeting by stating that this was not a negotiation. This was a clarification of corporate standing and a legal notice to correct the record. Trevor's face lost color by the second. "This is a mistake," he said, voice tight. Elena, come on." He looked at me like I was supposed to back down out of habit, but I just looked back at him with something close to pity. "No," I said. "This is not a mistake. What happened 2 days ago? That was a mistake. Firing the legal owner of the company without checking who that was? That was your mistake." The compliance officer remained silent but observant. He took notes and nodded slightly as Janice outlined the implications. Every contract Trevor had signed in my absence was, at best, vulnerable. Without my approval, none of them had proper legal standing. Some clients could rescind their commitments, some deals could be nullified, some vendors could sue, and worse, some investors could claim fraud for misrepresentation of executive authority. Trevor tried to interrupt several times, but Janice kept speaking, calm, unshaken, document after document. The board members were visibly shaken. They had assumed Trevor was acting with full authority, that his signatures were valid, that the company was legally structured as they were told. Now, they realized none of it had been true. I watched one board member flip through the papers, eyes wide. He whispered to another, "She owns everything. This is real." And it was. Legally, morally, factually, there was no dispute. I had not hidden anything. They had just failed to look. Trevor tried one last time to regain control. He stood up, adjusted his collar, and said, "This is an attack. You are trying to destroy everything we built." I stood too. I did not raise my voice. I did not insult him. I simply said, "No, I am here to protect what I built. You just branded it. I was the one who built it." There was a long silence after that. No one argued. No one defended Trevor. The weight of 15 years of neglected paperwork had finally come to rest where it belonged, in front of the man who thought I would never come back. The board agreed to halt all operations that required executive signature until the legal structure could be reviewed. The compliance officer requested copies of every current contract, and Janice handed out notices of formal ownership correction. As I left that room, I did not feel victorious. I felt justified. This was not revenge. This was rectification. I had spent years being erased quietly, bit by bit, until I was nothing more than a shadow behind a public face. But now, I was back in the light, with the law on my side, and the company I built no longer in the hands of someone who never earned it. David Lynn, one of our longest-serving board members, leaned back in his chair and let out a long, slow breath. His tie was loosened, his posture slumped, not from fatigue, but from something heavier. "I always suspected something was off," he said, almost to himself, as if he had been carrying that thought for a while but never dared speak it aloud. The room was tense but silent, waiting for him to go on. He looked directly at me then, his eyes no longer skeptical but searching. "Trevor told us you sold your stake years ago, that you had cashed out and stayed on as a courtesy." I did not flinch. That was a lie. He nodded slowly, then turned to the rest of the board. "If what she is saying is true, and I see no reason to doubt these documents, then Trevor's actions are a massive liability to the company, a legal time bomb." The others murmured in agreement. No one jumped to defend Trevor. No one even looked at him. He sat across the table, still trying to keep his expression neutral, but the corner of his jaw was twitching. He knew the tide had turned. David was not just any board member. He was the one who brought in 2 of our Series A investors. I stepped forward, voice steady but low. "You will find that every contract signed without my consent is technically void. That includes client agreements, investor term sheets, and at least 3 major partnerships. If any of those parties push back or audit your corporate authority chain, you are exposed." Janice nodded beside me, confirming every word. We had pulled the records. We had checked every signature. Every dotted line that carried Trevor's name without mine was a mark of risk. And there were many. Board member Cynthia Monroe, who had always stayed out of inner politics, finally spoke. "Why would he lie about her ownership?" she asked. "That is not just a legal issue. That is deception. To us, to clients, to the entire company." Her voice was sharp, not angry yet, but teetering on the edge. Trevor opened his mouth to answer, but she cut him off. "And do not say it was for efficiency or optics. That excuse does not work when someone is fired without even knowing they still legally own the business." David folded his hands. "This affects everything. The value of the company, our investor confidence, regulatory filings, hell, even our IPO readiness." He turned to Trevor, tone now ice cold. "Did you really think this would never catch up with you?" Trevor gave a weak shake of the head, but offered no real defense. No apology, no explanation. He looked cornered because he was. I took a breath. "Look, I am not here to destroy the company. But I am also not walking away again. Not after 15 years. Not after you tried to erase me." My voice cracked slightly on that last line. Not from sadness, but from all the weight behind those years of quiet contribution and growing invisibility. The room felt it. Cynthia lowered her eyes. Another board member, Andrew Roth, cleared his throat and said, "Then what do you want, Elena?" Simple question, but it held everything. Power, justice, control. And I had already made up my mind. I want the legal record corrected. I want the contracts reviewed and restructured properly. And I want Trevor to step down from his executive role until further notice. It landed like thunder. No shouting, no fight. Just silence as everyone absorbed it. They all knew I had the right. The documents proved it. The law was on my side. And the truth was undeniable. David nodded. It is the only way forward. Cynthia added, if we do not act, the whole company could collapse under legal scrutiny. There were no objections. Just silent agreement. Trevor's eyes flicked toward me, not with rage, but with something else. Like he finally understood that I was not bluffing, that this was not personal revenge. This was structural correction. The board called for a closed executive session to vote. I stepped out into the hallway with Janice and the compliance officer. My heart was racing, but I kept my face calm. I had walked back into that building 2 days ago to reclaim what was mine. Now, the walls were starting to shift. The cracks had formed, and soon, something much bigger would break open. The board held an emergency session that same afternoon. No long lunches, no pushing the decision to next week. The urgency was finally real to them. They had seen the paperwork, they had heard the truth, and they had watched Trevor flail for an explanation that never came. Inside that boardroom, behind closed doors, they voted. By the end of the day, Trevor's executive privileges were formally suspended, pending a full legal and internal investigation. He was told to hand over his company laptop and was escorted out, not by security, but by the company's own internal audit team. That was their quiet way of saying this was not just about one person. This was about the company protecting itself from its own deception. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I did not let the board's polite applause or the HR manager's awkward congratulations settle in. There was no champagne, no dramatic I'm back moment. I simply nodded, thanked them, and walked back into the open office space that had once felt like home, but had become unfamiliar in my absence. The faces turned as I passed. Some people whispered, others froze. A few clapped. I appreciated it, quietly, but I had no time to soak it in. I headed straight to my old desk, the one that had sat vacant for weeks with a reserved sign someone had pinned on it like a posted apology. I sat down, powered up the system, and entered my admin credentials. They still worked. No one had dared remove them. Probably because no one else knew how to access the full operations dashboard I had built 15 years ago. My code, my design, my architecture, it all lit up like nothing had changed. That screen was my true territory. The colors, the data flow, the clean dashboards, it was all still intact. I exhaled, not relief, just confirmation. This company was still mine, in every real way. My first act as reinstated CEO, not a speech. Not a press release. I reactivated the employee development fund that Trevor had quietly cut last year. It had been one of our core values, to invest in our people, to sponsor night school, conferences, certification programs. Trevor had shut it down under the guise of streamlining costs, but I had known better. He had been trimming anything that built loyalty to someone other than him. And so, with one click, I brought it back. I wrote a short note to the people operations team. Effective immediately, the fund is live again. Full retroactive reimbursements approved. Let our team know they matter. That was it. No fanfare, just action. Then I moved on to the internal communication channels. I drafted a company-wide memo, simple, honest, direct. I wrote, as of today, I have been reinstated as Chief Executive Officer of Vireon Metrics. Legal review is underway regarding recent actions that have impacted leadership decisions. My focus moving forward is to stabilize operations, restore trust, and recenter this company around its founding values: transparency, innovation, and people-first culture. My door is open. I sent it. I watched the email ping through the system. And then I waited for the responses, for the ripple. Within an hour, replies started coming in. Some were cautious, some were warm, many were curious. But one message stopped me. It was from Erica, our first data analyst, the one I had hired personally back in our earliest days. She wrote, "I stayed because of the culture you built. I almost left when it disappeared. Glad you're back." That one message meant more to me than any board vote or legal title, because it reminded me why I started this company in the first place. Not to build a name, not to pose for headlines, but to create something that empowered people, told the truth with data, and actually mattered. The office was quiet by sunset. Most of the team had gone home, unsure of what tomorrow would bring. I stayed a little longer, refamiliarizing myself with systems, reviewing documents Trevor had signed without authority. There would be damage to clean up, legal fallout, client conversations, and maybe even public questions. But none of that scared me, because now I was not walking blind. I had the truth, the law, the ownership, and most importantly, I had my company back. The silence of the office at night was the same as it had been when I was building this place from scratch years ago. And in that silence, I felt something else. Not vengeance, not pride, just clarity. The kind that only comes when you know without a doubt that what was stolen from you has been returned. And this time, you will protect it with everything you have. Today, Vireon Metrics is still thriving, but under new leadership. Mine. The desks are still in the same place, the logo is still mounted on the glass in the lobby, and the data streams still run across our dashboards like rivers feeding into a greater current. But something fundamental has shifted, and it is not just the name on the door. It is the energy, the clarity, the culture. We run things differently now, and it shows in the way people speak up in meetings, the way teams collaborate across departments, and the way our clients trust that what we build is real, earned, and built to last. When I came back, I made one promise, to myself and to everyone watching quietly from their desks, wondering if the storm had passed or just changed direction. I promised I would never let fear or ego take root here again. So we lead with transparency. We have instituted open financial reviews once per quarter, letting department heads see where the money goes. We rebuilt our ethics committee and gave it real teeth, not just ceremonial titles. We created anonymous feedback loops for all employees, not just the ones who know how to get a meeting on my calendar. Most of all, we hold space for people to grow. Not just climb, grow. There is a difference. One builds titles, the other builds legacy. Trevor? He is no longer our concern. The legal system has taken over where I stepped away. He is under active investigation for fraud, misrepresentation, and breach of fiduciary duty. The last time I heard his name was when a journalist called to confirm whether he had actually filed millions in contracts without a legal signature. I said yes, but I had nothing further to add. I do not chase punishment. That is not my story. It never was. The truth is enough. The truth has weight. It takes longer, but it always lands. Some days, I walk past the boardroom and remember the day he fired me with that smug little nod and a printed letter that looked like it had been drafted days in advance. And now, that same boardroom is where we host our mentorship sessions. We invite junior staff to sit in on meetings. We show them how decisions get made. We teach them what power looks like when it is handled with care, not control. I did not return just to run a company. I came back to restore it, to unearth what we had buried under too many layers of politics and pride. And we did. And me? I never raised my voice. I never slammed a door or sent a dramatic email. I never posted a thread on social media with hashtags or a list of receipts. I did not need to. I simply did the work. I brought the paperwork. I called the lawyer. I showed up in the room. I did not get even. I got real. And that made all the difference. People assume revenge has to be loud, messy, explosive. But sometimes, the most powerful revenge is the quiet kind. The kind that unfolds in conference calls and signed documents, in team meetings where the right people speak freely, and in systems that finally work because the right hands are on the wheel again. I do not walk around the office like a conqueror. I walk like someone who has been through fire and decided not to carry the smoke with her. I smile more now, but it is not the smile of someone who won. It is the smile of someone who rebuilt, someone who knows what it feels like to be erased and then write herself back into the story, line by line, decision by decision. And every time someone thanks me for keeping the company alive, I gently correct them. I say, I did not keep it alive. I brought it back from the dead. Because there is a difference, and the people who stayed, they know it. So yes, Vireon Metrics is thriving, But it is not because of some dramatic takedown or corporate coup. It is because I remembered who I was, and I reminded them all whose name was on the foundation. Not just in spirit, not just in effort, but in ink. Legal, binding, undeniable ink. And when you build something from the ground up with your own hands, there is a kind of justice that comes with returning to it. Not to burn it down, but to help it breathe again. That was my quiet revenge, and I would choose it every time.